Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The North Carolina General Assembly gets back to work this week when the state House and Senate begin the long legislative session. Lawmakers left some key issues unfinished last year, issues ranging from Medicaid expansion to medical marijuana. They'll try again on those and other failed efforts and focus on some new priorities. WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain is here to break it all down. Travis, good to see you again.
Thanks for having me.
So we're coming off an election. Before we get into the legislative business, could you lay out the power dynamics in the legislature? What has changed since last session?
So it's very similar to the last session, except a little bit more Republican. For years, the governor's been a Democrat. The legislature has been controlled by Republicans in both the House and Senate. That continues to be the case, except whereas in the past, the governor could veto things, and then if Democrats stuck together, the Republicans could not overturn his veto and pass things into law without his consent. Now in the Senate, they've got what's called a supermajority. It means they can overturn his veto. And in the House, Republicans are one seat short of a supermajority. So any given bill that the governor vetoes that he doesn't like, all the Republicans have to do is get one Democrat to vote with them on it, or take a vote to overturn on a day when attendance isn't so good. And they can pass things that the governor doesn't like, that the governor would not ordinarily allow to become law. Okay, well, let's talk about where the last session left off. There was a big push for a number of initiatives, but things kind of fell apart. What happened? Yeah, so for years, the governor and Democrats have pushed for Medicaid expansion, which would take the taxpayer-funded health insurance program that now serves the elderly, the disabled folks, kids, and it would expand it to help the working poor as well, people who make too much money to get, government insurance right now, but they don't make enough to afford it on their own. That's something that Republicans have been standing in the way of. We're one of, 13 states that hasn't done it. It's a federal program. And until now, the Senate is on board with it. The House is on board with it, Republican leaders in both chambers, but they disagree pretty radically about how to go about it. The Senate wants to add some other healthcare reforms in. The House says, no, let's not complicate it. Let's just do it clean. So we'll see. But this is the most momentum Medicaid expansion has had the entire time I've covered the North Carolina General Assembly. So for years and years and years, it looks like Medicaid expansion could actually happen this year.
Medical marijuana is another area, as is sports gambling. What happened with those?
Yeah, so medical marijuana last year, it passed the state Senate. It did not pass in the House, so it kind of dies for that legislative session. But I've talked to the bill sponsor, a guy named Bill Rabin from down in Brunswick County. He's going to bring it back up. I assume it will again pass the state Senate. And it may pass the state House this time. There's been a lot of turnover. In the last election, roughly 25% of the House turned over and roughly 25% of the state Senate. So roughly 25% of the lawmakers who are coming back to Raleigh are different than they were last year. Sports gambling is one that passed the Senate last year as well, and then it fell one vote short in the House. So that's one that you'll definitely see come back up. There's a lot of money behind trying to legalize online sports gambling in North Carolina, and bet on it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Well, given the new strength among Republicans, and you alluded to this a little bit, and also the fact that there are some wild cards in that you have new legislators, what are the odds that these things will actually get over the goal line?
Pretty good, but I always say that legislative sessions are unpredictable because it's 170 different people. And yes, the leadership has a lot of control over what moves and what doesn't, but they're accountable to the other members. The Speaker of the House is elected by the majority caucus, which is the Republicans. He has to kind of, a lot of times legislative leaders will say it's like herding cats. So you got 170 people. On average, they file about 12 bills or resolutions each. It is real hard to say, all right, this will happen and this won't, and this way. Like sports gambling, we thought was going to pass last year, and then it fell like a vote, like I said, one vote short. So
with the GOP so close to a supermajority in the House, and we're likely going to see Governor Cooper veto some of the bills that they pass, what is the likelihood that they're going to be able to attract some Democrats to their side to override those vetoes?
So to hear Speaker of the House Tim Moore tell it, really good. He won't name names, but he says there are several Democrats who have told him, hey, we're ready to work with you on this issue or that. The governor says, nah, we're going to hold the line like we've been holding the line. I don't know. The proof will be in the pudding. I mean, look, no party is a monolith, right? There are moderate Democrats who may agree more with their Republican colleagues on this issue or that issue than even they do with certain wings of their party. So it'll be a real test of the governor's ability to keep people in line, particularly, I mean, he's term limited, so he's got 2 more years in office. I asked him what it was like to be a lame duck a while back, and he did not care for that characterization. He said, and I think rightly so, that, he's still got half as much time as most governors who served in this state's history, because most of them, were one-termers. And so he sees it as not an issue. But yeah, that's going to be something we watch, that and attendance, because the veto override, you got to have 3/5 in either chamber to override a veto, but it's not 3/5 of the total membership. It's 3/5 of those present and voting. So not only do you have to worry, if you're a Democrat, about Democrats jumping ship and voting with the Republicans, you got to worry about somebody just being absent one day, or what we like to call taking a walk, which is where you just literally get up and you walk out of the chamber and you don't vote on something, but the math changes, and so the other side can win.
Well, let's take a quick walk of our own, and when we come back, we'll talk about the new initiatives lawmakers are focused on this year. Stick around. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL state government reporter Travis Fain about the upcoming legislative session, which starts this week. Travis, we talked about old business that Republican leaders hope to wrap up this session. Are there any new initiatives that you'll be watching for?
There are a bunch, and some of them are not new in that they come up every year, but they're new every year, and maybe there's renewed focus. The state budget every year obviously is really important. 20-something billion, 25, 26, $7 billion, probably up closer to 30 now. Education funding is always a big debate. How much we pay teachers is a big debate. That will be even more of an issue this year. There has been a long-running court case people may have heard of called the Leandro case, and it basically argues that we don't spend enough money on public schools in this state. The Supreme Court said, yeah, you got to spend more. The legislature said, you don't get to tell us how much money to spend. But that's coming to a head, this kind of decades-old issue, and we'll see how much money the General Assembly puts toward schools and how close it gets to the target in the Leandro case. Also big this year, and kind of big every year, state employee raises. It has become very difficult, I'm told, for a lot of state agencies to recruit and retain employees. I mean, it's a tight labor market out there, right? It's tough to hire people. Well, that's true for state government as well. The vacancy rate in July, or the summer of this year, was the highest it had been in at least a decade, something like 22% across state government. That is a massive number. It was the only number in the decade that I saw that was over 20, and really the second highest was 16%. So lawmakers know they're going to have to do some sort of state employee raise, some sort of enticement to attract and retain good employees.
What about abortion?
Oh yeah, abortion will be, put it this way, Phil Berger, who is the Republican leader in the state Senate, he said that it would be a failure if Republicans did not pass some sort of abortion policy. What that will look like, either they don't know yet or they're not saying yet. We shall see. Right now, abortion is generally illegal after the 20-week mark in North Carolina. I would expect that to move up, but the governor is going to veto anything that further restricts abortion. And that's where there will be some intense pressure on a handful of more moderate Democrats to back the Republican play there. And then for more moderate Republicans, there will be a lot of pressure because religious groups that support Republicans, groups that are staunchly pro-life, are going to push really, really hard for the most restrictive rules they can get on abortion. And that's going to put moderate Republicans who are in districts where that doesn't poll so well in a really hard place. So that abortion is always a hard issue, but I think it will be particularly hard in this legislative session.
There's also quite a bit of stuff that lawmakers almost have to do each session. You mentioned the budget, for instance. Are there other areas where you expect action? Yeah,
there's a couple. So we've been back and forth on redistricting, the drawing of the maps that we use each election. The state's congressional map was thrown out. The legislatively drawn one was thrown out. The court put a new one in for these congressional elections, but it was a one-time deal. So they're going to redraw the congressional map again. You can assume that Republicans in the General Assembly will draw a map more favorable to elect Republicans from North Carolina to Congress. I assume there's going to be a lawsuit about that. There always is. So we'll go around that merry-go-round again. They're going to have to redraw the state Senate districts. Supreme Court, the court here said, yeah, you got to redraw the state Senate district again. They may try to draw the North Carolina House. I mean, look, you're doing 2 out of 3. Why not do all 3? I don't know. I also would expect a new voter ID law. Voter ID is something we've been back and forth on for more than a decade at this point in this state. But the most recent voter ID law in the state was struck down again by the court. And so Republicans will try again. And the question there will be, will Republicans go for a law that they think that is fairly strict on voter ID, what kind of ID you can show at the polls and still be allowed to vote, versus something that Democrats can get on board with? But voter ID polls really well, polls pretty well in North Carolina and around the country, including with some Democrats. So there's a bipartisan deal to be made there. The question will be, do they make it?
And it seems like Republicans might have an easier go of it if their legislation ends up before the courts, particularly the state Supreme Court.
Yeah, that's right. The state Supreme Court flipped, party control of it flipped in the last election and went from barely a Democratic majority to a pretty solid Republican one.
So we've established that Democrats are weaker this session. Are there any chances that they'll be able to make progress on their agenda?
To the extent that they like things that Republican leadership likes, yeah, sure, ought to go great. Look, any lawmaker that you ask will tell you most of the votes we take down here are bipartisan. In fact, most of them are unanimous. And sure, that's true. But I promise y'all, you don't want me to write about most of the 2,000 bills and resolutions that get passed at the State House. And so where the rubber meets the road, the Republican majority will do what it wants. If it wants to give Democrats a little bit here and there, you can always expect something in the budget for certain Democrats in certain districts. Pork projects, for example, to entice them to vote for that budget or for other bills. There's always some horse trading, but writ large, Republicans are going to do what they want.
Are there any other issues that are sort of off the radar, things that you're thinking about?
There are a ton, and probably way more. This is one of those lists where I know I'm going to fall short, but the head of the public defenders, the woman who organizes that statewide, is going to make a big push for more funding. We have almost attorney deserts in North Carolina, where it's very difficult to hire an attorney to represent someone who's accused of a crime and can't afford to pay. So she's going to push to expand the number of public defenders in the state. You may see some gun legislation move. I know gun rights groups are really pushing. And again, look, after an election, if your party does well, like Republicans did fairly well this year, well, now what, right? Now what? So your constituencies, in this case gun groups, are going to expect you to push something through that the governor would otherwise veto. You may see conversations about transportation funding and infrastructure in general. We're a fast-growing state. That costs money for stuff like water system, roads. Last year, they shifted a bunch of sales tax money to help fund the transportation system. But there's general feeling that that's not going to be enough. So you may see, I don't know that you'll see any sort of final solution. That's the kind of thing that gets talked about for years and years and years before some big plan is approved. But you'll probably see talk about that. And credit union rules is something that I think you'll see. Apparently, the rules for credit unions, which are like a bank, but they have members, they're nonprofits, they're a little bit different. Like, for example, the state employees credit union, you have to be a state employee or adjacent to sign up. So those rules haven't been rewritten in North Carolina since apparently the 1970s. And there's a push from some credit unions to fill spaces where banks may have left a certain community. A lot of times rural areas, and credit unions are saying, well, hey, we can move in and serve these folks, but you're going to have to change the rules to allow us to do that. So I think you'll see that. I think that's kind of under the radar, but it's coming.
Well, Travis, thank you for the preview.
Absolutely. Glad to do it.
That's WRAL State Government reporter Travis Fain. For our previews of the new legislative session, visit the NC Capitol section of WRAL.com. I'm Jack Hagel. Thanks for listening to the WRAL Daily Download and for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.